Hey, I'm back. If you missed me, don't worry. I'm here. I'm okay. Um, I was just, I felt I had been giving out too much, putting out too much information too quickly, and I wanted to take a step back and to make sure that you had a chance to catch up on things because you do have other classes going on as well, and you are also going through a difficult period of life right now as well. This is unprecedented times. These are times that we have not seen since 100 years ago, actually, 1918. The Spanish flu. Look it up if you haven't already, which I'm sure most of you already have, or at least you've heard about it. So I'm making this video today. This will be the last video of this unit, and then we are going to move on to the next unit after spring break. So while I was giving you time to catch up on things, I also came up with a few things that I wanted to make sure um, that you were aware of, um, and how things are going to run for now. So, if you look at your grade book and things like that, a lot of the things are going to stay the same. The quizzes, you should be doing the quizzes. Some of you have been doing a really good job. Some of you have gone well ahead of us. That's fine too. Those should be a priority. And I posted a announcement on our news um, section of D12 that told you the things that you should be focusing on. So the quizzes are definite; those are not going to change. The written response, it's going to change. We're still going to do them, but it's going to be a lot less writing, and the questions are going to change as well. So we will do one of those, and I will introduce it to you on Monday, and then I'll explain how that works afterwards. Um, and then when it comes to tests, um, I'm not going to really do tests. You're going to do projects for me, more or less. We'll use the word project. It's a nice way of saying it. I will come up with them, and then I will give them to you, and you'll work on them, and you'll give them back to me, and that will fill in the place of what your test mark would be. So the quizzes kind of help because they're kind of like that multiple choice component. The written part, the written response is more obviously the written, and then the projects are a mixture of both. So it gives me a good understanding that hey, you know what I'm talking about. So that's how things are gonna run. You're gonna be giving me your student activity guides. Some of you have done a fantastic job. Some of you have not. But you're gonna have to because don't I really strongly encourage you not to think of this as a extended um, break. It's not. We're in class, even though we're not. We're still doing things. You're still required to do work. Um, that 3 hours per week. I think I said 3 hours per day once. That makes no sense though. That 3 hours per week that I'm giving you to work on, that is still required of you. So going forward, last thing before we start with the actual lesson and lecture part is that I'm only going to be doing videos on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. That way, it gives you some time in between to kind of digest what I've talked about, and then also gives you time to work on other school stuff because I'm sure your other teachers have been giving you things as well. So I won't burden you too much with a lot of work. So, um, if you're following along on the slides, this is a slide 111. If you're in your booklet, this is page 26. You may notice in the top right corner, there's a play button with a black screen. Um, these are video commentary done by Mr. Hendrickson. Because he's also teaching this section just to a different class. So if you want to listen to those as well, feel free to just please watch my videos. I'm just kidding. Whatever you feel most comfortable doing, then please do. But just remember, those are also an option for you as well. But you won't be listening to me. You won't be seeing this. So it's up to you. but my heart will be broken if you switch. I'm just telling you that now. I have a very weak heart in that sense. Anyways, I've talked too much. Now let's get to the thing. So this is student activity 22, nationalism and the peace settlement. So last time we did a video, we talked about Canada's contribution to the fighting. We are going to see the end of the war today. And we're going to focus our attention on the question, how did national interest influence the peace talks? So some words that you're going to learn today that by the end of it you'll understand a lot more. Armistice, the 14 points, self-determination, the Treaty of Versailles, and the triumphant success of the League of Nations. I use that in sarcasm. You will see why when we get there. So let's begin. We're going to begin. It's 1917. We are going to be introduced to the introduction of the United States into the First World War. So from 1914 to 1917, the United States has been sympathetic to the Allies. It had more in common with places like the United Kingdom and France and Canada than it did with the autocratic central power. So the Austria, Hungary, the Germans, and I guess the Ottomans and the Bulgarians as well. Their governments were a lot more authoritarian, almost. Well, not almost. They mirrored very much a dictator style government. So the United States had been sympathetic to the British, to the French, and its allies. So it was upset, and it was getting quite angry with the Germans as well, because the Germans and their U-boats, so their submarines, had been attacking any boats that were in the ocean. They were not really concerned about who they belonged to. They were more concerned with, this is how it's going to run. Anything in the ocean is fair game. So they called it piracy. The Americans called the German response to the oceans as piracy. So the man pictured here on slide 113 is President Woodrow Wilson. He wanted the Americans to get involved, but Congress refused to help directly because they were going down this idea of isolationism, which I'll explain once we're finished reading this point out. But does supply the Allies, which does anger the Germans. So on the one side, you have the United States saying we're not going to go to war because we have this idea of isolationism. The president says he wants to, but he's upset because the Germans are attacking American ships who are supplying the English secretly by the Germans. So, I mean, you can kind of see this is a little bit of a mess situation. Two things I must bring up at this point right now is even up till now, the United States president cannot declare war on anybody. It has to go through Congress. Congress has to agree to go to war. What the United States government or president can do is he can move troops into an area to protect American interests. And if that army should be attacked by an enemy, well, they'll have no other recourse but to defend themselves. So that's what they do to circumvent that. But Woodrow Wilson can't say America's going to go to war. He has to go to Congress to do that. Second thing, this idea of isolationist. You may not. I'm just going to give this to you. If you want to ignore it, feel free to. If you don't, if you're really interested in this, it is a good bit to know as well. So the period during the war and a little bit in the 1920s, the Americans go through this idea of isolationism. They close themselves off from the outside world. They don't want to get involved in other things, other disputes in different countries. So this isolationism, they really promote that in the United States. So that's where we stand now. Two things are going to change the way that the Americans feel about the war. First is what's now called the Zimmermann telegram. So Germany they send a telegram, which the British intercept and they give it to the Americans. The Germans offer an alliance with Mexico if they declare war against the United States. So the Germans are saying to the Mexicans, declare war on America and we'll back you up. The U.S. are outraged and they declare war on the Central Powers and as an associated power. Another thing that also happens that kind of gets the ball rolling, it happens with this ship called the Lusitania. This happens much sooner than the Zimmerman telegram, but it's a British ship that was sunk in 1915 by the Germans. It kills a lot of American civilians. So that's one of the things that kind of starts to boil over this feeling of America joining the war. So Wilson immediately after the Zimmerman telegraph and gets it through Congress. They agree. He drafts 4 million men and begins shipping soldiers to France at a rate of 10,000 a day by the fall. So America is shipping soldiers to France, but the Americans refuse to break up their army and they keep it in southern France. So they're not going to be broken up and shipped into different areas. The Americans are going to act as their own army. So the way that the Canadians had 4 divisions and the 5th one is kind of divided amongst them, that's how it kind of runs the same thing as well. But they're very much more acting on an independent way. So now we have a new power joining, fresh soldiers. The idea, and if you want to look into it, the idea of the doughboy, these soldiers, they're called doughboys because they're plump. They haven't seen war for 4 years. They come in fresh. They're well fed. They meet with the soldiers who've been at the front for 4 years, in the trenches, dirty, unshaven, skinny, malnourished, full of lice and fleas and all these nasty things. So the Americans come in fresh-faced, and now the Germans have a new army to contest with. So by September 1918, the Germans could not provide the support to their allies as before. The German economy is falling apart. There's famines going on in Germany because of the blockade by the British. They're at no they have no means of supporting the war and helping their allies. So Bulgaria, threatened by the allies in the south, quickly surrenders. So Bulgaria, hands up, we surrender, they're out. The Ottoman Empire, which we haven't really focused a lot on, but there are some pretty interesting battles there. I'll maybe show you. I'll find a clip of the Battle of Gallipoli. Really interesting. So the Turks in the Middle East were being pushed out of Palestine and were able to be overrun. So the Turkish army is being beaten by the British and by the Russians. If any of you have ever seen, it's a really good movie. It's called Lawrence of Arabia. If you haven't, I believe it's on Netflix. It is 4 hours long though, so I mean, now you really have a lot of spare time, so I really strongly encourage you to watch it. Lawrence of Arabia. It deals with this area and a man by the name of Lawrence and his campaign against the Turks. So, looking at the next ally, Austria-Hungary is disintegrating as its components of ethnic groups begin to declare independence. So, we talked about Austria-Hungary being this multinational empire. These ethnicities are saying, why are we even doing this? And they start to achieve this sort of ambition for self-determination. So on September 28th, Ludendorff, who is a field marshal in Germany, recommends peace on the basis of Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, which we will talk about, and exploratory discussions with the Allies begin. The Allies, particularly Wilson, demands an end to the monarchies as a prerequisite to any negotiations. So what Wilson says to the Germans is, before we can get any sort of peace on the table, before we can even start this discussion, the Kaiser needs to leave. He needs to abdicate. So that is what Wilson is saying. So Marshal Ludendorff resigns, and his successor, General Wilhelm Kroner, told Kaiser Wilhelm that he can no longer enjoy the support of the army. Wilhelm abdicates the next day, November 9th. So the Kaiser has decided to leave the throne, and he will spend the rest of his life, I believe, in the Netherlands, a broken individual. So Hindenburg was declared the German supreme commander after Ludendorff is gone. So the war had really been orchestrated by these two people, Ludendorff and Hindenburg. And an armistice is declared. So they agree to stop firing. So there is a ceasefire declared effective November 11th, 1918 at 11 o'clock. So guns are silent. So if you're following along, slide 116, this is the Great War, part 8. I'd strongly encourage you to watch it. Now we need to talk with the peace settlement. So it's November 11th. The guns have stopped. We need to figure out what we're going to do. Everybody is happy that the war is over. Like we talked about at the beginning, 15 million soldiers have now died, and there is damage done to industry. So they want to end this. The peace conference was not held immediately because they have to start to organize how this is going to work out. Russia is absent from this because there is civil war going on in Russia. Japan was supposed to be there, but then they left as well. So there's a lot of people going in and out of this conference. They're trying to set up an organization, how they're going to do this. Russia, for those of you that are familiar, in 1917 had a revolution, and now they're going through a civil war. So Russia's kind of not present at these sort of events. So the peace was based on Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. So Wilson had created these 14 points. They're really well done. You can look them up. And one of the points was this idea of national self-determination. So the European empires, places like Russia, Germany, and Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, these places, these large countries, had many different ethnic groups in it. This self-determination was saying that these small countries, these small peoples, were going to become countries. That was one of the best ways to bring peace. So France, the United Kingdom, and the United States would be the biggest players, and they were represented by their leaders. So France, Georges Clemenceau. So if you're following on slide 118, he is the man staring at the camera with the mustache. The United Kingdom was by David Lloyd George, who has his shoulder, his right shoulder to us. His arm's kind of like this. The United States is Woodrow Wilson, the tall guy with his arm stretched down. And then Italy by Vittorio Orlando, who has his hand like this. Basically, he's like any other Italian. They talk with their hands. So these are the big four. They're going to be involved in organizing this peace settlement. But when we talk about national interest, each of them is coming to the table with their own set of things. They are each going to argue for certain things, and this is what makes the peace process a little more difficult. So let's first focus on the British. This is what the British want. They want to ensure European security. They didn't want France to get too strong by making Germany too weak. They want to keep that balance. They don't want to be pulled into another war, and they don't want things to get all messy in Europe. So they want a secure peace. They want to settle territorial issues and also to control their empire. They don't want people messing around with their empire. They will actually increase the size of their empire after the First World War. They will take places in the Middle East, places like Iraq, Palestine, and Jordan. These places now, these modern countries will be, and Saudi Arabia, well, parts of it at least. These places are going to be a part of the British Empire. But they want to settle these territorial issues because they don't want people going over to war over these sort of things. They want to maintain the British naval strength. They want to make the German economy viable and a strong trading partner with Britain. They don't want to see Germany completely destroyed. They want to see it as a country that can maintain the balance in Europe. They support the United States in the 14 points. The British Empire demands separate representation. So the Canadian Prime Minister, Robert Borden, if you don't know what he looks like, he's the guy on the $100 bill. He attends the conference as well. So Canada is represented by its Prime Minister, separate, but still a part of the British Empire. Now, we're going to look at France. France and Georges Clemenceau, they come in with an idea very different from the British. They're out for revenge because they're the ones that the war has been fought primarily on their soil, and they want blood. So they want to ensure the security of France and limit Germany. They want to make sure that Germany cannot do what it had done twice already, the Franco-Prussian War and the First World War. They want to create a buffer zone between France and Germany, so this area where there is no German army, so that there is not this fear that they can quickly jump over. They want to punish Germany for the war. They want to recover Alsace-Lorraine, that province that was taken during the Franco-Prussian War. They want to get money from Germany to pay back the damages that they caused, and they want to also take over as much of the German industry as possible. So if this hand is Germany, this hand is France, this part right here is called the Ruhr, and in there's lots of coal and industry. They want to have access to that as a sense, essentially as payment for causing the damages in the war. So France is really out for blood. So if we're talking about national interest here, the British, they want things basically back to normal with them securely on top. The French, they want blood and they want revenge. Now we'll go to Italy, because remember, Italy started the war on the side of the Central Powers, but then they switched over because the British offered them things that they wanted. So they were going to get the territory that was promised. So if you're looking at this map, that those places in the orange is the territory that they want, that they claim to be theirs. So they're going to get parts of it. So they get increased Italian influence in the Mediterranean. So they're sort of happy with what they get. And their national interest is very much securing things that were promised to them. So just a little side note, this is World War I. My great grandfathers, both of them, they fought for the Italians against the Austrians in the Alps. So the Battle of the Po River, my great grandfathers were both there. Just a little thought. I thought I'd throw that out there for you to enjoy. So Japan was at the conference. They increased their Asian empire. They secured territory that had belonged to Germany, and it was basically just given to them. Like, here you go. Thank you for your service. Although there wasn't really a whole lot that they needed to do. They have a freer hand in China's affairs, so they start to become a little bit more powerful in the Asian theater. They get a racially equal clause in any settlement. So this idea that the white versus the Asian, it doesn't exist anymore. So we're going to see how that starts to turn Japan into a power. The United States at the table, they attempt to heal the wounds of Europe after the war and try to create a lasting peace, because they saw what happened. They want to figure out how can we make this better. So they wanted to follow the 14 points to the letter, and they wanted to become more involved in world affairs. That's what Wilson wanted. So Wilson very much saw his job and his position as, I'm going to be more out there in the world as well. But Congress had a different point of view, and Congress they wanted to avoid situations where the United States had to be forced to go to war in a place that they didn't want to. Sounds kind of different than what the United States is now, because ever since World War I, they've stuck their noses in almost every single conflict that has existed to now. If you think I'm lying, go look at the wars that are fought after World War I. World War II, they're there. Korea, they're there. Vietnam, they're there. Afghanistan, they're there. And so on and so on and so on. And even supplying things too. But that's a whole separate conversation that we won't have right now. Okay, so we've decided this is what everybody wants. I hope you noticed that Germany wasn't there. I didn't talk about Germany's position. It's because they weren't invited, which is kind of ironic and kind of strange because they're the ones that are going to have to sign off something that they had no sort of thing, they had no sort of say in. The reason that we're focusing on Germany right now is because all of its other allies are gone. They don't exist anymore. Austria-Hungary is no longer existing. The Ottoman Empire doesn't exist. It's just Germany who's left. So this is the treaties. The initial idea was for the Allies to settle issues between themselves and then invite the defeated powers to discuss the peace. Several different treaties were written, each dealing with the defeated powers. So the one that we're going to focus on is the Treaty of Versailles, signed in the Versailles Palace, and that was between the Allies and the Weimar Republic of Germany. So it's called the Weimar Republic because now it doesn't have a king anymore. It has elected officials now, a president, and it was declared in the city of Weimar in Germany. So that was June 28th, 1919. The Treaty of Saint-Germain was between Austria, because Austria is its own country now. The Treaty of Noailles was with Bulgaria. The Treaty of Trianon was with Hungary, and the Treaty of Sèvres, the Treaty of Lausanne was with the Ottoman Empire, which again doesn't exist anymore. So they all had their separate treaties, and if I said those names wrong, forgive me, because anyways. So let's focus now on the Treaty of Versailles, because the Treaty of Versailles is the most important, and some argue that the Treaty of Versailles, the signing of it, is the signing of a 20-year peace or a 20-year pause between the First World War and the Second World War, and these are the reasons why. So this is what happened to Germany. So they lost 10% of their territory. So this map here shows you Europe afterwards. So they lost all overseas colonies. They lost 12.5% of their population to places like Czechoslovakia and Poland. 16% of their coal fields and 50% of their steel and iron industries. They also lost territories. Places like Alsace-Lorraine were returned to France. The Sarre coal fields were under French control for 15 years. The annexation of Austria was prohibited, so Austria and Germany were never to be joined again. We're going to see how that changes. The annexation of Czechoslovakia was prohibited. Again, we're going to see how that changes. The annexation of Poland and Danzig were also prohibited. The northern Schleswig returned to Denmark. The territory of Brest-Litovsk was made independent states. So, Brest-Litovsk is a treaty that was signed between the Germans and the Russians. So, during the Russian Revolution, the Bolsheviks take over, so the communists take over, and they sign a treaty with the Germans. So if you're looking at the map on slide 126, places like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and a large part of Romania and Poland, these places become independent. They were given to Germany as a part of the treaty, but now they become independent states. So Germany lost those as well. Another thing they lost, we're going to focus now on their military. So basically, the territory that they won during their wars of unification against Denmark, Austria, France are gone. So now we go to the military restrictions. So the Rhineland is demilitarized. So that area between France and Germany, no German soldiers can be present in that area. The German army will have no more than 100,000 soldiers. There is to be no manufacturing, importing, exporting of weapons. Secretly, though, they are doing this. And if you're curious, I can give you some more information on this. But they'll actually go to China and they will test weapons there secretly, obviously. So there's no stockpiling of poison gas. There's no tanks. They have a naval limit to 15,000 men, 12 destroyers, 6 battleships, 6 cruisers, and no submarines. And absolutely zero or no military aircraft. So an army or a country that had prided itself on its military was now completely restricted on military equipment. So These are sort of the other things that the Treaty of Versailles said, the legal issues. So Article 231, Germany accepts sole responsibility for the war. So this idea of the war guilt clause. This one hangs very heavy in terms of starting the Second World War. Because if you remember from the beginning of this, the two countries that actually started the war were Austria-Hungary and Serbia. It wasn't actually Germany. And then Article 227, Wilhelm tried as a war criminal. Again, he was not the one who started the war, but he was a part of it. And then Articles 228 to 230, German military leaderships brought to trial. So again, they are attacking what the Germans kind of saw as their pride and joy, the military. So repatriation. Article 231 declares that Germany would pay repatriation to be determined later. Started out as 226 billion Reichmarks and was dropped down to 132 billion Reichmarks. So that is extremely heavy to put on a country that A, has now lost its industry, and B, has lost its territory in the world, its empire. So now they have to figure out how they're going to pay this all back. And then we also see the creation of the League of Nations. So the League of Nations, think of it as the United Nations predecessor, the first United Nations. It's created to essentially do what the United Nations does now, prevent wars from happening. So we're going to have to now focus on the German reaction to all of this. Because remember, this Treaty of Versailles was kind of established without the Germans knowing. They were just given this thing and said, here you go. Here is the peace treaty. Sign it. So the German declaration was not invited to negotiate and view the terms, and they viewed the terms as way too harsh. Like I said, they lost a lot of their industry. They lost their territories in Africa and the Pacific, so they really have no way of building up this economy back to its pre-war days. The delegation under Ulrich Graf von Brockdorf Rantzau, he left. He's like, this is way too much. I'm out. So Chancellor Gustav Bauer was installed in Germany and agreed to the conditions. The treaty was signed on June 28, 1919, and ratified by the League of Nations on January 10, 1920. So, the treaty is in place. And like I said before, some people view this as a 20-year pause. And if you're following along, I would really strongly encourage you to watch the video on slide 131, the Treaty of Versailles and its consequences. You're going to see that people like Adolf Hitler are going to use this as a tool to get people inflamed and get them involved in things, the world war that comes afterwards. Anyways, but we'll talk about that next unit. So, the League of Nations. The League of Nations was Wilson's most aggressive attempt at world security. President Wilson envisioned a global community which would discuss and respond to the world's crises and events, not just go to war right away. 42 countries joined the League of Nations, and then 16 would eventually leave afterwards. Several important countries did not join, though. So Russia, or the Soviet Union at the time, had no interest in joining because they were fighting a civil war, and they saw the rest of the world as against them because the Soviet Union was the first and only at the time communist state. And the United States, the country that actually wanted to have this sort of organization, didn't even join. Wilson wanted to so badly because this was his brainchild, this was his baby. Congress is like, nope. We don't want to get involved in wars that don't involve us. So if we get involved in this League of Nations, that means we kind of have to get involved. So right then and there, the League of Nations is missing out on two major powers in the world. So you're going to see that it kind of lacks the teeth that it needed to be a super success, because we're going to talk about its failings. And if 16 countries are going to leave afterwards, it kind of shows you that didn't really have a good run. So that is it for the lecture. The summary: how did national interest influence the peace? Well, you can talk about how each country came to the table with its own agenda. The British wanted to get things back to the way they were, where they were on top and kind of keeping the peace on the continent. France was there for blood. Italy was just, it wanted what was promised. The United States came in with this idea of bringing peace to the world, and the United States was going to play this huge role in it. That is what Wilson wanted. But then Congress kind of slaps them back to reality and says, no, this ain't going to happen. You're just going to come back here and we're going to continue our isolation from the rest of the world. Russia's doing its own thing. Germany wasn't even invited to the thing. It's the peace, and now they are given this document basically saying it's your fault, you're paying for everything. Oh, and by the way, everything that you had fought for in the 1870s, that's gone. Your army, that's gone. Basically, it has crippled Germany, and we're going to see that sort of this big pressure is going to create hatred for others. And people like Adolf Hitler are going to take this sort of stuff and say, look at what they've done, and this is what I'm going to do if you listen to me. And we're going to see people actually buy into that sort of stuff. Because when crazy things happen, crazy people sound sane, and the sane people are the ones that look crazy. So that is it for today. That is it for this unit. On Monday when we do our video, I'll explain what you're going to do for me next. But if you have any questions or concerns, please either comment them or email me, and then continue working on your quizzes, your booklets, and yeah, even the quizzes and booklets from the last units. Please get them to me as soon as you can. That's it. Enjoy your weekend. Stay safe. Stay warm. And I will see you Monday.